One word I've been sharing with everyone is reimagine. Reimagine the strength of our community, reimagine what's possible, and reimagine what we will become in the months and years ahead. New memories will be made, new bonds forged, and yes, adversity brings disruption, but it also brings clarity and the opportunity to reshape our future together. We've had national leaders visit our region, including the president, who spoke of unity and confidence. And regardless of politics, those words ring true, and they matter now more than ever. Our community epitomizes unity, and your local government, under the direction of City Council, supported by a dedicated city team, is committed to leading us through these unimaginable times with integrity, resolve, and transparency. Because like many aspects of local government, disasters don't follow party lines. And take it from me, no matter what you say or decision you make, somebody will be offended and upset. You're welcome. In the aftermath of a crisis, we are faced with tough, often conflicted decisions, many with political implications. But in moments like these, we have to rise above the noise and the politics. The mayor, city council, and our entire City Kerrville team are committed to finding that balance. While we each may love our community in different ways, we must lead with grace, humility, and perspective, not just today, but every day. Because in challenging times, not everything is simple as it seems, and not everything can be taken at face value. But what can be taken at face value is this: our resolve is unshaken, our mission is clear, and while others may look to assign blame, we are focused on finding solutions. In chaos, we choose clarity, in hardship, we choose action, and in the face of uncertainty, we choose to lead. Which brings us where we are today for many reasons. And I'll kind of group our efforts on the flood response into three categories: search and recovery operations, economic and long-term recovery, and debris management and rebuilding. Our partnerships with local, state, and federal agencies came together swiftly. Over 2,000 personnel and assets were deployed from 25 different states alongside 80 local agencies, 7 federal agencies, 3 different countries, and over 18,000 registered volunteers with over 150,000 hours of volunteer time. This was the largest response in Texas history, and we are not done. Within just 36 hours of the flood, Kerr EDC and city representatives were already on the ground, meeting with local business owners to assess their needs and begin charting a path forward for economic recovery. From those early efforts, Kerr Together was born, a community-led initiative that now serves as the central hub for the long-term recovery efforts. In partnership with Kerr Together, the Kerr Economic Development Corporation, or Kerr EDC, board moved swiftly to establish a long-term recovery group, or LTRG. For those unfamiliar with an LTRG, it's a formal structure made up of local nonprofits, faith-based organizations, civic leaders, government agencies working together to coordinate every aspect of long-term disaster recovery. That includes everything from case management and housing assistance to rebuilding homes, restoring services, helping families navigate mental health, applying for grants, and so much more. The mission is simple: to rebuild lives, to restore hope, and to make sure that no one walks this road alone. Now, about debris management, the scale of what we're facing has been historic. I believe this is the 3rd or 4th largest disaster in the state of Texas. Thanks to the strong partnerships in the state level, the state of Texas has committed to covering the operations and the cost of debris removal, which is going to total in the tens of millions of dollars. A tremendous relief for our local taxpayers, but make no mistake, this is a massive, multi-phase operation, and it will take time and it will cost money. There are still a lot of uncertainties that we have left. Crews are working zone by zone across the region, prioritizing safety and efficiency. Residents are being asked to sort debris by construction materials, vegetation, appliances, and so on, and place it curbside. This isn't going to be a quick cleanup. We are way ahead of the game. We typically don't see this quick of a response across disasters, but leave it to Kerrville and Kerr County to stay ahead of everything. And again, it's going to be a thorough one, so we definitely ask for everybody's patience and cooperation as we work through this process together. At this point in the disaster, things are going to naturally slow down, and it feels like you're not doing enough, but it's going to take some time. While I can't capture everything that's happened over the past 76 days, I want to leave you with this. Kerrville and Kerr County are strong, not because of government programs, not because of outside help, not because we believe in each other, but because we invest locally, because we serve a higher calling than just our own convenience. While disaster recovery remains a top priority, we cannot lose sight of the bigger picture. The day-to-day operations of our city must continue. The fiscal year 26 budget was developed before the devastation, yet there remains a lot of uncertainty that we must navigate over the coming months and years. Property values across the city were drastically impacted by the flood, and while new value added to the rolls, much of that was offset by losses. In effect, even at the 3.5% voter approval rate, we are operating under what is essentially a no new revenue budget. And there's still uncertainties on that lost value. With staff's recommendation and a lot of discussion, the City Council made the difficult but principled decision to pursue the 8% disaster tax rate, which we can talk more about during question and answers. While this budget includes a modest 2% increase to the general fund over FY25, the increase is mostly driven by inflationary costs, essential services, staff retention, and very few new positions or resources were added. We did this because we believe in protecting our taxpayers while maintaining core services. But the truth is, without new revenue sources for the future, long-term legislative issues and legislative pressures, we do face future trade-offs that we have to consider. Some could include hiring or budget freezes, service reductions, delays in capital and equipment replacements. We are actively exploring new tools, finalizing studies, and getting creative on other user-based revenue mechanisms to bring stability to our operating budget for years to come. Simply put, we are balancing today what we are planning for tomorrow. Thank you for the chance to serve you. Thank you for your encouragement through all of this, your support, and your unwavering commitment to our community. And now we will open it up to whatever questions that y'all have, whether it's flood, city, name it, we can talk about it. We'll dive down whatever rabbit hole y'all fancy.
If you have a question, raise your hand, I'll bring you the mic. Anybody have a question?
If there's no questions, this will be easy.
So will the floodplain change in Kerrville? And also will you talk about, Mike Kirby talked before about the floodplain +1 for construction?
Yeah, so yes, the floodplain will change. We fall under the current 2011 FEMA flood map. The city of Kerrville has been a part of the National Flood Insurance Program, or NFIP, since the 70s, and it's still under the 2011 map. We know it's going to change, we just don't know what it's going to change to yet. In the city of Kerrville, we already do have floodplain management, so really the two big rules are, if you build anything new now, it's got to be 1 foot above the current floodplain, wherever that is in that area. If you have damaged property that is greater than 50% of value or lost value, or it's just wiped out, you then have to rebuild it 1 foot above the current floodplain. And so we did actually see some success within that. So we had some infrastructure that was 1 foot above the floodplain in quite a few areas, and they had minimal damage to the structures itself. Most of it was underneath the structures. Also over by Ringo's on the river and some of those shopping centers, all of those were required to build above the floodplain, and we saw no damage to those infrastructures. So it does work even on a 2011 format.
Anybody else?
There was an amazing statistic in the Kerrville paper today about the cubic feet of rubbish, vegetative waste, rubbish waste. I heard that cannot be used for mulch because it's contaminated. So what's happening with that?
So, as I said, the state of Texas is forking up that bill. All of the debris that comes out of disasters is contaminated with plastics, metals, body parts, just other different things that have to be cleaned out. So all of that is going to get shipped to a mulching company that is certified by TCEQ, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. They will clean that mulch to a certain level, and then they'll do whatever they want with it. So we know that there's frustrations about it not coming back, but the other challenge of that is the fact that most all of the land that the debris is coming off of is private property anyways. And so there is out of the 1.2 million cubic yards that we're already seeing, A very small fraction of that is coming from actual public property. So that being said, some of the concern on the mulch or some of the why on the mulch side is, well, that's going to improve our riparian zones and some of the river. We know the river's change, it's going to take years to come back, but we do have groups, and part of the long-term recovery group is managing the riparian zones. We are working with UGRA and other agencies to figure out what is that long-term plan to make sure that we can continue to rebuild those riparian areas. So Hill Country Alliance, UGRA, and there's some other entities we're already having those conversations with.
This is more curiosity, like, how will are there steps to redirect the river, change things so that, I guess, there's not a lot of stop and starts and...
Yeah, so...
Is that something that can be done, or...?
So, I'm going to kind of break this question into two parts. You know, the river did change its flow. We cannot change it back. Once the river changes, we cannot go in and dredge things out and create new rivers. It has to be natural. The only way you can kind of divert things and do things is through either damming systems or other things. I know that there's a lot of discussion surrounding flood mitigation and what does that look like. That's a whole different topic of conversation. You start diving into, well, where do you put the dams? Most of everything that's on the west side of the county is private property. So there's a lot of things that are going to have to go into what that looks like. Not just the county, but the county in partnership with the long-term recovery group, in partnership with UGRA, in partnership with the city, we formed kind of a committee, a task force, if you will, to try to tap into the comptroller funding and Senate Bill 5 funding, which just got approved today. We're looking at the appropriations side for that. But we are looking to figure out what are some flood mitigation efforts that we can do, both on the west side of the county and also within the city limits of Kerrville.
Has our population changed at all due to the flood, or has it stayed constant, or we're losing or gaining people?
So I think it's too early to really tell. What we do know is in the city our projection is about $65 million of lost value. We did have some people that got displaced, whether that's through Rio Robles or some of these other areas. So I don't think we have a finite number yet on that. They actually have until, I think it's November 4th. Don't quote me on that. It's somewhere between now and I think November that they can actually go and file the disaster exemption rate to exempt their property taxes during the disaster. So I think once we get that information, we'll kind of know a little bit more if people are going to be able to rebuild, if they're going to come back. I do think, though, that at least within the city of Kerrville, I think the population will be minimal as far as loss, but I don't know yet.
So clarify, when you talk 65 million, are you talking about Kerrville? Kerr County?
Kerrville. So I will, yes, great question. That is $65 million of lost value for the city of Kerrville. So
It's much greater for Kerrville.
it is much greater for Kerr County, but yes, for Kerrville, it's $65 million. I don't even know what the loss is. I don't even think they know what the loss is yet for Kerr County.
Can you explain these property laws? How many houses, how many permanent residents lost their homes, and how many businesses were lost? Can you kind of explain, when you say 65 million, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, that is.
Can you break it down? Because the numbers out there, I'm a little confused.
Yeah, so that number right there is straight from the appraisal district. That's how uncertain everything is. We don't know if that number is more, we don't know if that number is less. I don't have the exact number of houses or businesses that were completely lost at this point. They're still doing damage assessments, they're still doing assessments on it. Rio Robles had, I think, like 4 homes that I know for sure that were getting permitted. So we're still really early on in this. I mean, we're less than 90 days, so there's still ongoing damage assessments. The $65 million of estimated lost value is just from the appraisal district. We did not want to make an assumption on that, and that was just a very quick number that they came up with based off of their initial assessments from the appraisal district. So we're still doing our internal damage assessments to figure out how many homes were actually lost, what businesses were actually damaged or went out of business. I will say that from my understanding, talking with our economic development team, I want to say most businesses are already back open and running. Lake House is open again, 1011 Bistro is back open, so. With that reaction, that I don't know. But they are working on it. But 1011 Bistro, I mean, within 36 hours, we were already communicating with 1011 Bistro about them generators to start working through it. So the economic development side, they're still working on their assessments, but there have not been a lot of businesses that I think were impacted directly by the flood. And we're seeing the business sides being impacted indirectly by the flood because some of the restaurants, for example, flipped operations and started, donating food out or started cooking for first responders or, we're doing something for the people that we're visiting. And so we're seeing some economic loss from that, but it's still too early to tell. We just don't know yet.
So once they get established again, they'll be on the tax roll. You have a certain date that they get completed, go back on the tax rolls, they won't get to reduce.
Yeah. So if they do a disaster tax exemption, that would stay in effect until it comes back on the rolls. Once it comes back on the rolls, then it'll be at whatever the appraisal districts will appraise that at. So.
We heard your comments about once the river has reestablished its course, that's what it is. What about the river bed and how it has been filled up with rocks and sediment and other debris and bringing the bed up, thus the water holding capacity of the traditional banks is reduced? How do you calculate that into the floodplain?
Yeah, great question. So we did, I think in 2019, there was something called a bathymetric scan. There's people probably much smarter than me that knows what that is. But that kind of tests it scans the riverbeds and everything. So we have a starting point pre-flood. Historically, when it comes to floods, and you actually see this just on the other side of the dam, in Louise Hayes Park, you can see all that sediment, and there's a lot of sediment that's filled up. Most of that stuff has already been pushed downriver. So what we're seeing is the water is actually cleaner. Most floods will clean out everything. It was moving so fast. Things aren't getting pushed to the bottom, they're actually getting pushed out. So when that wall of water moves, it's actually churning up everything out underneath and moving it. And for kind of perspective, so we don't know yet, but we are doing some assessments. We do know there's some organic debris within Nimitz Lake. The Nimitz Lake side will start getting cleaned out, I believe, end of October. They're working on Ingram Lake right now and then moving their way down to Nimitz Lake. So we don't think that there's a salvage yard under there. We've been doing water quality testing since pretty shortly after, and the water's cleaner than it actually was before the flood. So a lot of things are getting pushed out and moved downstream, and it was moving so fast. There was one picture that was circulating where the water was going over a guardrail, and it actually twisted and spiraled the guardrail into a corkscrew. And so the force of the water is actually moving that sediment and junk out of it, and it's pushing it into other areas, which is why when you look at Louise Hayes Park, it looks like a desert. All that sediment was going over the dam.
Well, it's really great that you've got that scan as a base.
Yeah, so I think there was another scan being done, or I think we're trying to look at doing another scan, but we don't think the riverbed rose. We actually think that it's either stayed the same or we're not having any issues. For perspective, there's a couple models going around right now. One very early model going on. About midnight, the river was flowing about 50 gallons per second, so pretty average. By 4 a.m., it was flowing 900,000 gallons per second. And then there was even a study that showed when it hit Kerrville that it was between 900 to 1.6 million gallons per second. And Niagara Falls is about 750,000 gallons per second. So it was moving very quickly, very fast, and everything was being pushed down.
I have heard it was a 30-foot wall of water moving 17 miles an hour.
That's pretty much the average of it. Some of the water modeling on there, as it was coming around the banks, there's some predictions that the water got up to 90 feet coming around some of the banks.
Can you give some comments on the river trail where you see structural damage? not so much like it's going to open, but what is the status of it like?
Yeah, so great question. Status of the river trail. The entire river trail is intact minus one bridge. So there's been a couple areas where there's some erosion underneath the river trail that we're putting some structural side that we have to figure out how to do that. But the entire concrete and structure of the river trail is intact. There's one bridge out at over by the River Hill area, over kind of by Shriner. We are starting to work on getting those open in sections. So I think the Shriner G Street section is going to open first, and then as debris starts moving out of the park, then we're going to start opening more sections, and then we'll eventually get the bridge back open. But we are working. Our priority right now is to get some of our park systems back open. So we're working on Guadalupe Park, which I think we've had quite a few donations coming in from some NSL or NBA teams wanting to fix that one. And that one's a priority, and then the river trail is the other priority. Louise Hayes Park, we are taking our time on it. We're cleaning it, getting everything ready, but we're working on how to reimagine that park. You know, we don't want to just build something the same way we built it just because we can. So we are, now that we have an unfortunate clean slate, we are going to be looking at trying to reimagine how we do things, make it a little bit more functional, and so it's going to take some time.
I just want to give Dalton the opportunity to talk about how the water treatment plant was offline, and how well the ASR wells worked for the city while the water treatment plant was offline.
Yeah, great question. So within pretty much the first hour, our surface water treatment intake that's in Nimitz Lake got severely damaged and clogged up. Even with everything going on, it moved in so quick that they weren't even able to get it shut off in time before it started getting clogged. It's a process. So we basically immediately went on to well water. We operated on well water pretty much for that entire month with no issues. So no well water notices, the redundant system was in place and it worked. We did go into stage 4 for a brief amount of time, and the reason why we did that was more of a proactive preemption. It wasn't based off of science. We weren't sure how long it was going to take for that water treatment plant to come back online. We heard anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. We ended up, I think, getting it back online in about 2. But we were concerned at that time, just the unknown of the water quality. So until we started getting some good trending and testing on the water quality, we went into stage 4 just in case. Aquifer levels were fine. They kind of maintained. And once we got back on surface, I think we're now in stage 2. But yes, the plant operated as it should. We were able to tap into the wells. We are looking at some more redundancy stuff, which we were actually talking about before the disaster, about drilling another well potentially deeper. And so we've set some money aside to start engineering those type of things to add another deeper source of water, just as some more redundancy.
Good job.
So.
I've heard that the water quality at Nimitz, as Jesus said, is really great. And is it open for kayaking and swimming? Is that a possibility?
We're not, as far as I know, we are not restricting anybody from doing things. The parks are closed. If you get access to it, we're seeing people fish. We are saying, do things at your own risk. We don't know how much has changed. Normal things that we were jumping in before may have debris under there. So we're just saying use caution if you're doing it. But as far as the public access and stuff, our parks are still really closed at this point. But we know people are still fishing and everything. I don't think anybody's being stopped from that. I haven't heard any cases of that, at least in the city limits.
You said that Ingram Lake and Nimitz were cleaning themselves out. What about everything that's on the bottom?
The bottom of Nimitz Lake.
Right.
So so I don't know much about Lake Ingram. That's going to be the county side of things. Once the EOC kind of dissipated after the city started doing everything, Ingram Lake is going to be the county responsibility. So after we started kind of going back to our normal day-to-day operations, I don't know what the county commissioners have decided on Ingram Lake. We do know that FEMA and public assistance, they are focusing on Ingram Lake first, just because it's upriver, it's going to push stuff downriver. Then they're going to hit Nimitz Lake after that. I don't know what the status of the bottom of Ingram Lake is. I don't know. I know there's a lot of misinformation out there. From what we're hearing, it's a lot more organic debris But again, I don't know the status of Ingram Lake and Nimitz Lake. We're seeing a lot more organic debris than inorganic debris.
But
I'm curious about the quality of Nimitz Lake. Would you describe it as potable or contaminated?
Potable.
Potable.
Well, so Nimitz Lake itself technically is not potable, but we are. So I don't know if you've seen our our water treatment facility. If you haven't, get a tour of it. Join do a Citizens Government Academy. You'll do a tour of all those facilities. They test that water throughout the day. We are actually a testing facility for the region for water quality. So our water quality testing is showing higher quality of water now than before the flood. So we are actually pulling 80% of our water back on surface water and treating it just like we would normally. So the quality of water is cleaner than it was before. So it is not contaminated from things that we're seeing on it.
Have you reached the point where you're re-injecting water into the
Yes.
ASR well?
Yep, so anytime we pull from surface, we started injecting back into the aquifer, into the ASR. I don't know how many gallons we're doing, but typically with the river flows that are happening right now, we're probably doing anywhere between 500,000 to 1 million gallons a day.
anybody else?
Okay, let's figure out how to frame this. So 65 million shortfall in the budget, correct? Based on property values being reassessed.
Potentially.
So how did you arrive at 8% property tax increase for those people who were not affected by this? And didn't the federal government and the state government cover a lot of, what did they cover? Did they cover any rebuilding, or does FEMA gives out loans? I'm just curious, why 8% and how is that right?
Yeah, so great question. Why the 8%? So when we look at TDM and FEMA, that's a very complicated process. And I'm going to try to simplify it as best as I can. The state came in and covered a significant cost. We are what's called a type 1 disaster, so the worst you can get. And typically the state will cover 100% of those costs, where normally they would only cover about 75% of those costs. The state also came in and paid for the debris management side because they knew that it was going to be a significant hurdle. That's only the response or the initial phases of that. Then we go into what's called into IA or PA or HMGP. So IA is individual assistance, which is all the FEMA stuff, your homes and all that. Then you go into PA, which is public assistance, which we got declared. And then you have HMGP, which is hazard mitigation program, which we did not get declared on this one. So under PA, so public assistance, let's use Bear Creek Crossing as a great example. So Bear Creek Crossing, which is a bridge that got damaged and wiped out, so it's closed. The state is not covering that cost. So over the next 2 years, we're going to have to pay 25% of the repair and cost of that. That's just one bridge. We don't even know how much that's going to cost us right now. So under the under the public assistance program, everything that we do under public assistance, we're responsible for 25% of that. Now we can get some of that through in-kind. Our Parks and Rec folks, as they're doing stuff out in the parks, daily, we log that under disaster stuff. So we code it under disaster. So we're logging our equipment time, our personnel time, all those things. And those can go to the in-kind of the public assistance. And so when we did that, that was kind of the thing, is we have a lot of uncertainties. We do have a fund balance, and it's got about 13 million in there, but we have a lot of uncertainties that we just don't know. And as we were kind of going through this, now on the 8%, the way the state calculates tax rates is very misleading. And I'm going to try to simplify this as much as possible, but in 2025, your house is appraised at a certain taxable value. Next year, your house is potentially going to be appraised at a higher value. Let's just say 5% for the sake of argument, which is actually the average across the whole city. That delta, the difference between that appraised value and the existing appraised value, which included any new value that you had on from the previous year gets tacked onto that, generates what's called the no new revenue tax rate. That no new revenue tax rate is the tax rate that generates the exact same amount of revenue as last year as it does this year, minus new value. So we don't stack on new value on top of that. So that tax rate actually decreases even though we're generating the same amount of revenue, that tax rate is going down because any appraised values or any new value that was added on the previous year. So what's misleading about it is our tax rate is 5595. Okay, so that's what our current tax rate is right now. Under the no new revenue tax rate, we then can go from 3.5% from the no new revenue tax rate, not from the existing tax rate. So every single year the tax rate gets recalculated completely different. So anything from the no new revenue tax rate to the 3.5% tax rate is actually lower than the current year's tax rate. So at the 3.5%, it was 5571. So currently it's 5595. Under the 3.5%, it was 5571. The 8% moved it to 5711, which is actually only 2% above the existing tax rate and 8% above the no new revenue tax rate. State math, right? And so that's how complicated it is. And and please, I want you to clarify questions and remarks on this, because that's how misleading the state does on the calculation. Is that's 8% from the no new revenue tax rate, not 8% from our current tax rate.
So, okay, I know how business and government works. Once you get this implemented, you voted it in, we're all gonna pay an increase. You get a surplus 5 years from now because everything's rebalanced itself. You gonna lower our tax rate? Hell no.
Well, so even if you said, and again, from the business side, we're actually hitting to a point, and I kind of mentioned in the thing, we're actually hitting a point to where we're having to potentially cut services. Because the bottom line is our when you look at the general fund, which is the general fund funds your police and fire, which is 66%, about 60% of the general fund is police and fire. 80% of the general fund is personnel alone. And so when you say business, I agree. Governments are like businesses to a certain extent, except sales tax is 33% of our general fund, which is only driven by economic factors. We reduced our sales tax projections last year by 3%, and we only increased it by 0.5% this year based off of some projections of development that are coming in. On the property tax side, based off of the no new revenue tax rate in Senate Bill 2, which came out of the 86 legislation in 2019, even though it's a 3.5% above the no new revenue tax rate, that's not a 3.5% dollar for dollar increase. So that 8% only adds $40 from the current tax rate to the 8% tax rate from 5595 to 5711. So it's 2% above. So really, when it comes to a business standpoint, for example, on the enterprise, on water, for example, we can raise the base rates. We can charge more for irrigation. There's certain things from a business perspective that I can model out and change. So as an example, we were at $1 million of deficit in the water fund last year this time because we had a reliance on irrigation. We relied on irrigation for maintenance and operations. Last year we said, let's pull the reliance of irrigation by 30%. We added another 10% this year. So we cut the reliance of irrigation revenues in our maintenance and operations by 40%. This year we're in the black on that, so we do have surplus, which we can dump into capital improvement projects for new wells, new projects. Under the general fund, I can't do that. So we either have to go to the voters to raise taxes, or we have to find other alternate revenue streams within it just to maintain it. We are at a point, and I talked about this with City Council, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We're at a point now that a 3.5% is not sustainable for an inflationary factor. Last year, we cut the budget enough to where it was only a 4.7% increase, and most of that was salaries and personnel. This year, we're down to a 2% increase, which is, again, that even factors in salaries, personnel, and retention. Next year, I'm going to have nothing else but have to go to council and say, what services are we going to cut if we cannot find the revenue streams? We're at that point.
So one last question. So how much revenue are you expecting on the 8% tax increase on existing homeowners to cover the $65 million? Where does that land you?
So the way that the 8% was designed was to cover down on the maintenance and operations from that loss value. So again, we don't know if that's 65 million. We don't know if that's 120 million. We just don't know yet. That was an initial appraised value. If this happened in February, we would have a better understanding of where we were for the appraisal district. That 8%, again, because the way we're looking at this is not 8% off of the current tax rate, it's 8% off of no new revenue. It's generating about $350,000 in revenue to go into it. So you're looking at $40 a year for a homeowner under, we'll call it $400,000 home. So $40 a year. And the views out here that I see are pretty dang amazing. And so, when we look at this, and those that got impacted by it, are exempt. Once that 65 million comes down to new value, so all it was supposed to do is offset, as much as you possibly can. What we don't know, and this is the uncertain part, the third component, which I already talked about, we have no clue what we're going to be paying for 25% of public assistance. That is the big unknown. Is $350,000 going to cover that? Nope. Is it going to cover a portion of it? Yes, to a certain extent. But again, the other side of it that we're looking into is, it's not if, but when we have another disaster. Whether that's a flood, whether that's a tornado, whether that's a wildfire. And so by kind of creating a disaster contingency fund and trying to think ahead, we can potentially use that, for other things. We know just from the flood itself, just from July, we have $1.2 million that portion of that may get reimbursed from the state, from FEMA, and most of that was overtime. I got $400,000 just in overtime, for those couple weeks. So yes, it is a very small portion of it. Will it cover everything? No, but property tax stuff is very misleading, and the state does a wonderful job of the smoke and mirrors of that, and it's very difficult to try and explain. Explain. The best way I can explain it is 8% off of a lower no new revenue tax rate, not off the current tax rate.
Hey, Dalton, isn't it the fact that the emergency 8% tax rate can only be maintained for 3 years, and you have to ask for it again?
Well, and not only does it can only be maintained for 3 years, the council would have to do it again each year. So ideally, the goal of it is either the 65 million falls off and comes back on the value, or 3 years. Whichever comes first, that's when it goes. And so council made this decision based off of staff recommendations. This is the year that most people are going to have the damaged properties, and most people are going to have those issues. Next year, more people are going to come back online, and so we'll obviously reevaluate everything next year. But to answer your question, because I don't like talking just about doom and gloom, even though that's real, we are putting together a local resilience committee, which is, and I got some of the members that are actually in here, that are going to be talking through and how do we address those long-term issues? How do we bring solutions to the table to try to solve some of these long-term problems? And what does that look like for the future? So we're not just talking about it, we're actually starting to, I always say, you got to ask the hard questions, accept the often unsettling, difficult answer, and take necessary action. The other thing that's really challenging, again, among some of the point of the tax rate, again, I'm part of this demographic where I have to pay taxes, right? Nature of the beast. But the city, the voters, the community voted on the 65 and over tax rate many years ago. I don't even know how long ago. That's about $2.4 million a year in the general fund that basically gets exempted out. And so we're having to find creative alternate revenue streams to be able to offset that. Because you're right, we don't want to necessarily burden those that are paying property taxes or that are not frozen. So it's a delicate balance across the board that we're having to navigate, and we are working towards those solutions now. There's so many uncertainties that we just haven't addressed yet. And no, will the $350,000 cover it all? Nope. Will it cover a portion of it? Barely. But it's forethought and forward thinking on city council to at least say, look, we got to continue to look for the future. Some of these decisions are going to be very tough and difficult, and trust me, it's not going to get any easier. That I can't guarantee.
So, Community Foundation is probably amassed $300 to $500 million.
I think the last I heard it was like 120 million or something like that.
I've heard more than that.
And it very well could. Very well could.
So, is there any creative ways to leverage some of that money to help you? And I know you can't legally take the money, but there's got to be a way to. I mean, that's a lot of money.
It is. So to answer your question on the Community Foundation and the philanthropy side, you never want to mix philanthropy with government. Now, the way that we kind of leverage, so the city actually has 4 funds within the Community Foundation. We have a police, we have a fire, we have a parks and recreation, and then we have the Memorial Plaza Fund. And we do leverage those for certain projects, and we do try to get some philanthropic, support on that. Those are more donation-based, and we just house that community foundation. We will talk to the community foundation about, parks and recreation or some quality of life stuff where they'll either do it through a nonprofit or they'll build it, they'll build it outright. We partnered with the community foundation on like community arts programs. But as far as to fill a government gap, we cannot use it. And we actually don't want to use that. That is what kills philanthropic support in any foundation, is if there's that mindset of corruption or that mindset that money's getting funneled into the government. And so that is one thing we would never accept it. We don't want them to even talk about it, and we cannot fill government gaps. We actually do not want to fill government gaps or shortfalls using philanthropic.
Anybody else?
Oh, yes. Yeah, so the other thing on the disaster tax rate is it does not set a new no new revenue rate. So even if city council said, we're going to do the disaster tax rate for for 3 years, okay? And again, they have to do it every single year, so don't spread the rumor that they're doing it. But even if they do that, after 3 years or after the next year, it does not change the threshold of the no new revenue tax rate. So if the voters go and vote and say, we want to increase the taxes however much, 15%, whatever that is, that would change the threshold of the no new revenue tax rate going forward. This disaster tax rate, we have to go back to the original no new revenue tax rate regardless. So that disaster tax rate does not reset the threshold of maintenance and operations no new revenue. We have to go back to what we did originally and whatever we'll calculate that as. So it reverts back to the original. It does not change the threshold, and that's important.
So you may not know the answer to this, but I was surprised to hear that none of the lost souls, even though some of them were from Kerrville and had Kerrville residents, lost their life in Kerrville, that the flood did not result in loss of life in Kerrville. Is that true?
So I don't want to burst your bubble, we had 3. We did have 3. That was from a pre-1970 home within the floodplain. I can't remember exactly where it was. I can picture it, I can see the picture when we did the flyover, but we did have a loss of 3 lives from a home that got wiped away pretty early on.
Dalton, it was right there at 540 or at the loop and
there you go.
Yeah.
Loop and 5, yeah. I believe, yeah. And so,
To me, that's an amazing fact that although, you read the list of residents that lost their lives, they were all on the street.
yeah, it's one of those things where cities have a bad rap, especially in counties across the state, because, we restrict, a lot more things. We have a lot more regulation. Why do I gotta get a permit for this? Why can't I build on my property and private property rights and all these things? But, even recently, City Council had turned down a project right there at Francisco Lemus Bridge for, somebody that was wanting to build a small RV park within the floodplain. And Council was like, nope. And guess what? His RV and truck, and he almost lost his life, from just being on that property because it was his private property. And so while we question some of the rules and regulations within the cities, there's a reason why those exist. And this was a true testament of what that was.
Anybody else?
Well, we say, we got this till 7. We got to make this work. 6? Oh, I had 7 on my calendar. That's even better.
Dalton, can you talk a little bit about the cooperation between the city and the county? Because I get the sense that the city's got more infrastructure than the county does, and they've got to struggle to deal with issues with residents.
Yeah, so the collaboration with the city and the county, we maintain, obviously what's seen politically sometimes is not always the best, but our teams work really well together. Very early on, the city basically said, hey, we have the resources to be able to navigate this, so we staffed the EOC pretty much with 95% of our personnel. The city pretty much ran the show on this. We are supporting them the best that we can, but at the end of the day, the county's got to make their own decisions. right, wrong, or indifferent. So they are getting a lot of state support still. They're still, they're going to do public assistance to the PA side. And so they are, navigating our debris management stuff. Michael Hornis, one of our assistant city managers, he's doing a lot of stuff within the debris management. We have 3 locations that are being dump sites, one in Ingram, one in the city, one out. But yeah, we coordinate and communicate with them, but they're able to use a lot of the state resources and PA stuff to get the stuff that they need. They're still going to be responsible for 25%. And so when you start tapping into fund balance, to balance the budget, things get a little complicated.
I'm going over here first, Fred. You already had questions.
Thank you.
I'll come back.
Thank you. I'm gonna get Marla after you. I'm calling Marla right now.
I've read, and I want to know if it is true, that even some of the camps that were not destroyed or damaged in the flood still have to rebuild. And it's going to cost them, a good bankrupt them. Is that true? I mean, I know Camp Mystic was,
Yeah.
sustained most, if not.
Yeah, that's going to be a really good question. So I believe it was House Bill 1. House Bill 1 passed during the special session, which, included some of the camp changes, and we don't know what that impact's going to be for existing camps. We have no clue.
Because the camping industry is huge in Kerrville.
It is, and it is, and so we are looking at all of that as well. We do have Kerrville Shrine Park and some of these other areas. So we are diving in to see what that impact is going to be. I think it's still pretty early on. I see some amendments or some changes potentially coming in the next legislative session as some of this gets fleshed out. There was a lot of knee-jerk reaction stuff from the state. There was a lot of politics involved, and really the messed up term of never waste a disaster. The state took full advantage of that. And so we're still kind of seeing what the fallout of that's going to be, but we don't know. We don't know.
Could you shift to water issues? We get a lot of subdivisions. You got Whiskey Springs, where the golf course is. And what's the protected water sources? Update us on this water situation.
Yeah. So water situation. We do about 1.2 billion gallons of water a year. For the residential side only, and I'm going to caveat the residential side, we do about 650,000 gallons a year in residential. About 10 to 30% of that residential use is irrigation. So that's the potable water side of irrigation. Not everybody has a dual tap or a dual meter. So there's some that have just regular meters that can irrigate. We do about 290-ish thousand, almost 300,000 gallons in commercial, and then there's some miscellaneous that kind of stack up with that. And I think in stage 3 we did about 70 million gallons of actual irrigation water. So we do irrigation about 200 to 300 million gallons a year, just the irrigation of potable water alone. We also save, if you want to call it that, deferred, however you want to look at it. We do about 200 to 300 million gallons of reclaimed water. So purple pipe to the golf courses, purple pipe to certain commercial areas. When it comes to the city limits of Kerrville, which includes Whiskey Springs, they were already annexed in. They've been a PDD, a public development district, for 20 plus years. We have to provide those services. We have to provide services, within the city of Kerrville. So that was a big reason why City Council chose to not annex in DR Horton to add a new development in, because that was outside of the city, even though it was in the ETJ. So we comfortably could really add about 3,500 homes within the city and still be able to have capacity and everything on our water. There's obviously a lot of things that the city's starting to require. We're working on what's called our Chapter 110, which is some of our utility code. So they're going to start requiring water availability studies for new development. They're going to start requiring certain conservation measures within certain things. So there's a lot of things City Council is looking at, and staff is looking into on how we can kind of conserve. We are looking at new sources of water, but that's kind of like squeezing blood out of a turnip, right? But the reality of it is, if we absolutely had if we actually had a water crisis, and mind you, we look at it kind of a 20-year rolling average. Over the past 20 years or 10 years, as we start looking at this, you're right. If we end up in the droughts that we had in the last 2 years and it's constant, well, say bye-bye to green grasses. mean, I think that's just the reality of it. But I think if we look at a 10-year average, 20-year average, and base that over, produce a predictive modeling, we could cut 200 or 300 million gallons of water use, which is really half of our residential consumption right now. So we could really double our residential use by pulling that out of irrigation or potable water irrigation. The other side of it is, with the fact that we do about 200 to 300 million gallons a year of just reclaimed water, if we ever hit that point, we could basically say, hey, look, we need to start looking at DPR or toilet to tap, as they call it. You can start looking at those systems because the technology is there. There's many different types of technology. Once you hook that system up, you have another 200, 300 million gallons that you can use if you need to. So when it comes to the city limits of Kerrville, we have probably about a 15-year, 20-year plan, just based off of what we know and what's been around. It can put another 3,500 homes in that we've already predicted and built into our water plan. Anything outside of the ETJ, we do have some idea of it, but there's also a lot of measures that can be done should annexation occur or other things. The other thing to kind of consider, being a contrarian on this, would we rather have, especially because development is development, in the state, despite everything that they say, believes in the free market and believes in development. They want development. They've even done some things restricting petitions to where it allows city council, or forces residents to have a higher number of petition thresholds before city council has to do a 2/3 vote to change that zoning or to change that development. And that gets a little complicated, but the state's making it easier for developers to develop. So the other question is, if city council said, hey, we want to annex this development in versus not annexing it in with the concern, well, water's an issue. Well, what if they're going to develop anyways, but they come on Aqua Texas and then they only suck from the groundwater versus having a diversified portfolio within the city that uses 4.5 sources of water. So it's kind of one of those things that we're having to kind of balance of, if this is going to develop anyways, city council would say, look, you can develop, we'll annex you in, we have to deal with the services anyways, we might as well get the rooftops, but we're not going to give you anything. It's up to you to do it. We got to give you water, we got to give you this, and you're going to pay for it. But the question is are we being better stewards by doing that to allow them onto a water system that has a more diversified portfolio that's producing more water and by pulling in wastewater and some other things, versus saying, well, if they go onto an Aqua Texas public water system and they're only pulling from the groundwater, is that more damaging to the aquifers than not? And so these are all different things that we're trying to kind of balance, and city council, we're talking to city council about. But our water system is not in a crisis. I think that's the bottom line. If we're in a constant drought, and we're in a drought for 20 plus years, and the Guadalupe River becomes the Guadalupe dry desert, well, we have bigger problems to deal with anyways. And so we'll navigate that, but we do look at a 20-year average.
This is related to the water issue, but another big issue facing the city is employee housing. I'm just wondering what initiatives are underway, what the thinking is now regarding that. Second of all, several years ago, Mr. Comanche worked with the 2050 plan. I'm just wondering to what degree is that guiding today what we're looking at in the future?
Great questions. So the first one, tackle housing. When I came on board October of 2023, I came into a few what I call career killers, and housing was one of them. I'm like, this is either going to go really good and I'm going to be city manager here, or this is not going to go well and I'm going to have to find another job already. And so what the city is looking at, we have probably about 900 units that are going to be coming online over the next 5 to 7 years. I got about a 280 unit apartment complex that's going over by the sports fields. That'll be phase 1. I don't know what phase 2 will look like, but it'll be additional multifamily. Those should be online in January. So we'll be able, and those are going to be market rate apartment housing. Right currently, I have about 1,500 units of multifamily within the city. 2/3 of those are either 55 and over or assisted living. So I only have about 500 units roughly that are market rate. So this will add another almost double of market rate apartments in there. Lennar Homes, we have 2 developments going on. We have Windridge and Ridgeland. Ridgeland is the current one. It's about 130 homes, I believe. And all of those homes are already sold. Most of those are being built out right now. But I believe almost every lot is sold within that. I do have some of my staff members, I say low level, but some of our entry level positions that are in those housing. So we are seeing some benefit in that. The other Lennar project, which is Windridge, that one they're going to be required to build 62 homes a year at a minimum, up to about 490 homes. So over the next 5 to 7 years, that's going to be right by the middle school. And it's going to be, you can kind of see where the layout is. They're putting about $30 million worth of flat work in that right now. And one of the big issues that we have here in the city is we have a true economic three-legged stool. And there's probably actually an economist in here that's much smarter than I am because I slept through economics. But our three-legged stool relies on workforce, on housing, and jobs. And if any one of those in the city of Kerrville is out of whack, our stool falls over because we don't have a major metropolitan that we can pull workforce from, or that housing can be available, and people have to commute. And so that to your point, that's really challenging. So we have a supply issue in a very demanded economy. And even some of the houses that you see are very customized housing. When we were looking at housing, you see a lot on the market, but it's kind of a false positive because most of these are custom homes and may not fit everybody's fancy. Even some of the homes that are under $300,000, those are all 55 and over communities. So a lot of 55 and over communities or neighborhoods that are that. So the Lennar is going to fill that gap. So from the apartment side, it will fill some of the entry level housing coming in for teachers, firefighters, police officers, nurses. And then those Lennar homes, by adding the supply to what they're going to be doing, that's going to increase supply, and in turn, just like we saw, I'm hoping in Bernie and in San Antonio, we should start seeing some decrease in cost, or at least a stabilization of cost within those things. So they are going to flood the market with some supply, which is going to be a good thing. Let me get to her, and then I'll do the 2050 plan. Sorry. No, go ahead.
Dalton and I had a chance to have a conversation today earlier, and I really appreciate him giving time. I wanted to ask a couple of questions. First of all, if you have a position on using debt to close the shortfall that we're currently looking at. And then also, I want to say congratulations on the city taking a look at drilling a new well into a deeper area and exploring additional water issues and trying to find a solution to that. And then one of the things I did notice, you give out a lot of information really fast. It's like drinking from a fire hose, and I'm sure everybody here is spluttering, but anyway, not having a water problem includes the ability to restrict irrigation. So what that really means is, and I'm just kind of saying that for all of us sitting out here, including myself, John Harrison down the street from me, who, when I first moved in, we had this competition on who had the best looking lawn. And, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about a change in the way we live. And so some of our solutions include a change in the way we look at how we use water. So I just wanted to make that point. But if you could tell me what you think about your position on using debt to close our current financial issues.
So to answer that kind of really quickly, I don't think we have, and we're not using debt to close our capital. In the future, I mean that's not the plan right now, which is why we're trying to look for alternate solutions of revenue. Some could argue that, well, we did tax notes to cover down on fixed asset replacement vehicles, this year, for $700,000. Well, would I rather lease at 4 or 5%, over that time, or would I rather do a tax note, which is still property tax, and get it for 2.99%? So we are using some strategy in what we're doing, not just because it sounds bad, and we're using debt to cover our fixed assets. You're right. So I could argue and say, well, that's covering a shortfall within fixed asset replacement, which is why we're looking at new revenue streams and we're trying to figure it out. Under, let's call it ideal and normal and everyday operations, my goal and my recommendations to council would not be to use debt to cover down. And really, in all honesty, if it got to that point, and let's throw this out there too, just because it is an elephant in a room. One of the things that the city did not do was use fund balance to balance a budget. We didn't pull $12 million to go balance a budget within it. We operated within our means, as difficult as that was. Now, we have to by charter, which again, I think that's a fail-safe, and I think that's a checks and balances, for us to do. But, there's going to be some other government entities that are going to find some challenging times, by dipping into the fund balance. So no, I typically do not agree with that. If we do use tax notes to fund something, we are already looking at whether we should lease, whether we should purchase, whether we should do this. And we're looking at all of those different options to figure out how we can get the best tax rate and leverage the money the best way. So just because we're using debt for vehicles, we're doing that because it's cheaper than leasing those vehicles for 7 years. We can buy them outright and pay a cheaper interest rate over a 3-year span versus leasing them for 3 years. So 2050 plan. One of the things that we did last year, so I came on board in October, we had the election in May. I want to say by June, July, memory's a little bit fuzzy, we did a strategic planning session with City Council. So we've already had a 2050 plan. We actually last year recommended the council to update it because COVID happened. It was done in 2018. We wanted to update the housing model to make sure that the housing model still reflected everything going on. And we wanted to add a downtown section. And we really wanted to clean up some of the things that were completed and make sure we adjusted and fixed out some of the strategic catalyst areas. So we just finished all of that up and got done with that. But during strategic planning, what we're doing, which I think was very different than what had been done historically, at least just based off of my observation, we really got City Council to take the 2050 plan, because one of the things that I had heard on the 2050 plan was, this is great, we have this, this to model our city, and we can, do this. But I can ask every single person in this room what they want to do on the 2050 plan. I'm going to get 100 different answers. So what we wanted to focus on was the City Council is elected to represent our people or represent the community. And so we basically put up matrices of the different priorities: housing, downtown revitalization. I think there's 8 different categories in there. And between our senior executive team and City Council, we had different colored dots, and we went out and put them on all different stuff. So we actually have about 5 narrowed down council priorities that we've used for the last 2 years, and we've been able to target those, through tasks and through the different action plans within there. Just this year in, I believe, March, somewhere, I think in March I did it, but I started kicking off a city manager quarterly report. We just put another one out. It is on the website. We're not doing print because I don't want to spend all the money to do print copies, but we do have a digital version out. And we actually put in there all the different metrics that all the departments are doing, or different categories within the city are doing. And we also tied City Council's priorities that they voted on and selected during strategic planning, and all the different ordinances that apply to those different goals. So we try to really do priority-based budgeting and priority-based planning. So anything we're really working towards, we try to tie it to something within the 2050 plan for the most part. Obviously, there's some day-to-day things that are just never going to tie to the 2050 plan, but any projects, anything we try to do, we try to tie that to the 2050 plan. And not only do we try to do that, we don't just throw it at the wall and see what sticks. We do it based off of council. So election in May next year, we're going to have a strategic planning session in June or July again. We'll go through those same priorities. We'll have them pick some new ones, and then we'll kind of reshape our budget and reshape what we're doing. So we do follow the plan pretty extensively. All of our plans, we take information from that to work on building our CIP plans, our fixed asset replacement plans, our general facilities funds. So none of our plans sit on a shelf. We constantly look at those and make sure that we tie those to not just the 2050 plan, but also council's priorities, which align with the 2050 plan. And that was something that was done very different last year. City Council was kind of given a bunch of different stuff, but some of them were more task specific and not strategically specific. And so we shifted that kind of mindset where we know there's things that we need to work on, animal ordinances or downtown stuff or whatever. But even all of those, we've been able to tie those to the 2050 plan. And now this gives us a more myopic focus versus what we've kind of done is just throw stuff at a wall and see what sticks. and we just use the argument, well, as part of the 2050 plan, we should be okay with that. But that doesn't necessarily mean it aligns with council's goals. So we've now broken the 2050 plan out on really a biennial basis and focused on those specific things. Doesn't mean we're neglecting the rest of it. We just separate those between direct and indirect.
Anyone else? All right, well, appreciate everyone's coming. Thank you for all.